Now, a lot of people don't know all of the functionality within the formal model of the role-based access control model. And actually, I just recently wrote a paper for Information Security Magazine on role-based access control and how it plays in identity management. And the exam isn't going to get very deep into role-based access control, but it's becoming more important in the environment because we're having to control access to our assets. It's very difficult to do it just by users. You know, you could have 3,000 users, and how do you know what individual users have to have access to? It's a lot easier to know what role. You know, if this person is going to be doing backups, this is what they should have access to. That's a lot easier. So more and more companies are setting up role-based access control models. Now you could set up one that is in a hierarchy, and what that means is that one role will inherit all the permissions or rights from the ones below it. So for example, let's say there's in a hospital, there's a lab technician. He can only have access to certain information in the database. The nurse, she can have a little bit more access, and she inherits what the lab technician can access. And then there's the doctor. The doctor inherits all those permissions, and then he has some on top of that. That's how the hierarchy actually works. Now, role-based is also being used for separation of duties. And I told you you're going to see this in a few of the domains. And it's very difficult to actually implement separation of duties properly. But if you have a critical task and you split it up that this role does this part and this role does the other part, that's a lot easier to control than saying, you know, Joe does this and Bob does this. You set up roles, and it doesn't matter who you're plugging into. So you split up the critical task and assign the roles to only be able to carry out a component or a part of that task, and then another role has to finish it. Now, access can be assigned explicitly. That means directly to the user. So if I'm going to assign you read and write, that's explicit because it's based on your identity. The other way that a user gets rights would be through they would inherit it, and that's what I talked about with the role-based access control. It's not tied to an identity, it's tied to an actual role. So there's a difference between implicit and explicit. Explicit is that the rights are assigned directly to the user. Implicit means that the user inherits the rights, and it's usually inheriting from some type of a role.